turn the light on. It's on now. Okay.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming out today. I'm so excited to have our short story contest event. Actually, we also are having it in person. Yay! So I'm so thrilled. Thank you also to everybody who, viewing home and here, who submitted stories. It was really, really hard. There were so many good stories this year. And I'd like to introduce Liesl Shortliff, who was our author and the judge for this year. And I'm just going to hand it over to her, and she's going to do her thing.
Thank you for coming out today. It's a beautiful day. And I know that as a parent, it's not always easy to get out and come to the library. I'm a mother myself. I have 4 kids. I remember when I was a young mom, one of my friends said, good moms take their kids to the library. And I was like, oh, okay. And so here you are, all you good parents and caretakers, thank you for bringing your kids to the library. I think it's a really beautiful thing and an important thing. Do we have like a couple of seats up here if kids want to come take them? Welcome. So my name is Liesl Shortliff, and I'm an author of several books, which I'm going to show you all the covers at the end. I have this weird thing with Prezi, not like recognizing the images when I tried to move it to the top of my presentation. It was really weird. But I'll show you at the end. But so I just want to take you a little bit. I was asked to kind of talk about my journey as an author, how I became an author, my process for writing my books and stories. And so I'll just take you right from the beginning. Hopefully turn this on. Right from the beginning. Okay.
Oh, wait, you changed.
I did. There we go. Right from the beginning. When I was adorable. So cute. I'm going to get this to be on full screen here. There we go. Okay. So adorable beginnings. And my mom read to us a lot. I don't recall going to the library a ton when I was little, but we did have lots of books in our home. We had a home library, and my mom read to us every night. And so I'm the chubby, grumpy one there in the middle, and we're reading The Runaway Bunny. So I loved story time. And then I started school, and this got a little trickier for me. I loved story. I loved being read to, but this is when I was told that I had to learn how to read myself, and this was hard for me. I was really young. I was like one of the youngest kids in my grade, and we moved around a lot. There was a lot of transition in my family life at that time. My parents went through a divorce. I went to 4 different schools between kindergarten and 2nd grade. And so I struggled to learn how to read. It was not easy for me. And it was frustrating, and I felt kind of self-conscious because like a tutor would come in to try to help me learn how to read, and I would get pulled out of class, and I felt like I was sticking out. So I decided I didn't really like reading because I wasn't good at it. But then, I did catch on to it and I got better, but I still kind of had because I'd had this negative experience with learning how to read, I had kind of written it off and I was like, I don't really like reading. I'm not a reader. But then I found this book. I believe I found it in my home. My mom was really good about, she would go to yard sales and or old library sales, and she would get lots of books. And so we had plenty of books to read in our home. And one of them was The Boxcar Children. And I think I just I judged the book by its cover because we all do it. They tell us not to do it, but we do it. And so I picked up this book because it looked interesting, and I started to read it, and I could not put it down. This was the first book that I read entirely on my own, and it did not feel like a chore. It felt really exciting. And I just thought and so I read this book over and over again. I think that can also be really valuable. Parents, if your kids are reading the same book over and over again, don't discourage that. It's so great. They can get layers. They get something new out of it every time, and it can really help them increase their reading, their literacy skills when you're reading a book over and over again. I have books that I have read like 20 times, and I get something new out of it every time. So even though I read this over and over again, I thought maybe there are some other books that would be enjoyable. And so here are a few of the books that I was reading when I was young. Sideways Stories from Wayside School, which I believe is still quite popular. All the Judy Blume books, but Super Fudge was my favorite. Anything humorous I loved. Okay, I also really liked scary stories. So Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downey Hawn. Mary Downey Hawn is like the queen of ghost stories. And I loved this story. And I actually found this book in my school library. And it was just kind of sitting on the top. And I, again, judged the book by its cover and the title. I was like, ooh, that looks good. And again, just had this amazing experience and checked this book out of the library every chance I got. And I had never had my own copy. And I remember telling this story at a school. And as a gift, the school gave me my own copy of Wait Till Helen Comes. So now I have my own copy. Anything by Shel Silverstein. When reading was kind of hard for me, reading short form was really powerful. And I think it's good even now, like to switch it up, to read not just novels, but short stories and poetry and articles and things. Like we get different things out of the short form versus long form. Matilda by Roald Dahl. All Roald Dahl, love Roald Dahl. And Matilda was definitely a favorite. And I think reading Matilda really made me want to be a reader, to identify as a reader. I felt that there was something really powerful about books and reading, that they could offer us something that television and other art forms clearly couldn't. And so I really wanted to be a reader. And of course, I loved fairy tales. Most of my published books are fairy tale retellings. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. So becoming a writer was something that was very personal to me in the beginning. My very first experience writing was in a journal. My older sister actually gave me a little diary. I don't have a picture of that one. I should have a picture of that one. This is probably my second journal, but my sister gave me my first little diary. And actually, I might have it in my bag. This is so weird. Oh, I don't. I took it out. I'm sorry. I had it for a school visit, actually, this little diary. But writing for me was a very personal act. It was a way that I could express my thoughts and my feelings and kind of make sense of the world. Nothing makes sense to me unless I can put it in words. And so writing was my way of making sense of what was going on in my life, in my family. It was super helpful because going through my parents' divorce and my mom remarrying and getting step siblings, that was hard. It was confusing sometimes, but writing my thoughts and my feelings down really helped me get through that and make sense of it. And of course, I wrote my own stories. This is actually my very first story that I ever wrote. And it's actually a fairy tale retelling. I love that. I wrote it in second grade. It's called Torty's Wish. And it's by Liesl Robbins, because I wasn't married when I was in second grade. And my husband and I like to joke that we really should have had him change his name to Robbins, because Shirtlift can be very, very difficult. And sometimes embarrassing if people misunderstand the way I'm spelling it. I have to be really careful how I spell it. I have to say F as in Frank. Otherwise, I get mail addressed to Liesl Shirtless. And so I have a little bit of a complex about my name, which is kind of brings me to my first book, Rump. Both my names are kind of tricky, a little bit different. How many of you felt ever gotten teased by your name, for your name? Raise your hand if you've been teased by your name, about your name, or felt self-conscious about it. I for sure did. I got called Liesel the Diesel or Liesel the Weasel. My parents told me that they had intended to name me Megan. And I was like, whoa. Megan Liesel, really different. Why did you name me Liesel instead of Megan? I said, well, I guess there were like 3 other girls born around the same time or at the same time, and they were all named Megan. And so they decided, well, too popular, let's go with a different name. And my dad spoke German, my grandfather was German, my mom really loved the sound of music. And so they named me Liesel. And I kind of always, when I was younger, I was like, I wish I was Megan because Liesel was hard to spell. People didn't understand what it was. Every time I say it, they're like, oh, that's different. That's interesting. And I didn't want to be different or interesting. I wanted to be like everybody else. And so, so I always wondered if I had been named Megan, would I be any different? And I kind of got into name psychology, and there is like some really interesting studies about names and the psychology, how they affect our own identities, how other people judge us and think of us because of our names. And so I got this thought. I was like, I want to write a story about names, and I want to create a world where names are your destiny. That was my first idea, names being your destiny. And that very quickly took me to Rumpelstiltskin. How many of you are familiar with the story of Rumpelstiltskin? A lot of you, great. Okay, well, if you're not, I encourage you. I'm not gonna go tell this story today, but just know that the name Rumpelstiltskin is very powerful in the story, and it has like everything to do with how the story turns out. And so I wanted to write this story in a world where names were your destiny. I wanted to really focus on this idea of names. And Rumpelstiltskin is typically the villain of the story. You can see in this picture, he looks kind of creepy, villainous. But I also felt like this was unfair. And because we really don't know anything about Rumpelstiltskin. So the story goes that there's, I'll just do a brief overview. There's a miller, he has a beautiful daughter. He goes to the king that his daughter can spin straw into gold. She totally can't. But the king takes the girl, locks her in a room with a spinning wheel and a pile of straw, and tells her she has to spin the straw into gold or she's going to die. Well, she can't, she's crying, she's desperate, and this strange little man appears and says he'll spin it for her, but she has to give him something. So she gives him her ring, and he spins the straw to gold. The king does the same thing the next day. She's going to die if she doesn't spin the straw to gold. The man shows up again. She gives him her necklace. He spins the straw to gold. The next night, the king says, if you do it this time, I'm gonna make you the queen. And so the little man shows up again, and she has nothing left to give him, and he asks for her firstborn child. Says, give me your firstborn child, and I'll spin the straw into gold. Well, she's like, I don't have a child. Who knows if I'll ever have one? So he spins this. She promises him her firstborn child, and he spins the straw to gold. She gets married. She becomes the queen. She forgets all about this strange little man until about a year later she has a baby, and the strange little man comes back and he wants the baby. He's like, give me the child. Give me what you promised. And she's like, oh no, please don't take my baby. And she's crying. He's like, okay, you can keep your baby if you can guess my name in 3 days. Up to this point, we don't know his name. He's never said it. And so she starts guessing all these names, and they're all wrong. And she becomes so desperate, she sends a servant to kind of go search for the little man, see if she can spy on him. And she finds the little man, and the little man is dancing around a fire with a cooking pot, singing a little song in which he reveals that his name is Rumpelstiltskin. And he's boasting, he thinks he's going to get the queen's child. Well, when he returns the next day, the queen guesses his name, And in some versions, he disappears. In some versions, he tears himself in two. In some versions, he flies away on a cooking spoon. Because fairy tales come from oral tradition, there are lots of different versions of them. Okay, so that's the end. He disappears, and you're kind of left, and it's like fascinating. I love this story as a kid, but you're kind of left like, well, what happened to Rumpelstiltskin? Like, who was he? Where did he come from? How did he learn to spin straw into gold? Why does he want her baby? What's he going to do with it? And a lot of people think he wants to eat the baby. He's like this baby eating demon. And I thought, well, that's not fair. You know, we're making some judgments without real evidence. It's all circumstantial. And so I wanted to tell this story from Rumpelstiltskin's point of view. And I wanted to understand what he was going through and who he was and answer all those questions that I had. How did he learn to spin straw into gold? How does he know who the miller's daughter is? Why does he show up to help her? And why does he want her baby? I didn't, he's not a baby eating demon. He was like this sweet 12-year-old little boy. So that's how I started off with Rump, is really by taking a story that already existed, but then like looking at the blank space and the unanswered questions. How can we look at this differently? Which I think is a really good exercise for life in general. When we, all we have is our own perspective, but it's really powerful for us to be able to try to consider the other side of things. Why do they think that way? Why are they doing it that way? How can I understand this? And that's really what a fairy tale retelling, a fractured fairy tale, is all about, is looking at it from a different angle, a different perspective. And really, that's kind of what I'm doing with all my stories. So Jack, I kept in the original point of view of it being from Jack's perspective. I wanted to keep him the hero, also because I did not understand him in a similar way that I didn't understand Rumpelstiltskin. So we have Jack, and he disobeys his mother, and he trades a cow for beans, which doesn't seem very wise. Nevertheless, the beans are magic, and they grow into this giant beanstalk. But then Jack climbs the beanstalk and proceeds to steal from a giant who has apparently never done anything to him. And then when the giant comes after him to try, to seek justice, Jack chops down the beanstalk and the giant falls down dead. And I thought, why is Jack the hero of this tale? He's like a lying, thieving murderer. And that made me think of my brother. I know. He looks like a lying, thieving murderer. This is my brother, and that's me with him. And it looks like I have a squirrel on top of my head. I'm not sure if the squirrel might actually be on my head, because there's another picture with the squirrel actually on my brother's head. My grandpa, you can just see his hand right there. He was a squirrel charmer, I guess. Anyway, so my brother and I were very close. We were only 15 months apart. And we fought like crazy, and my brother was really mean. And he was very mischievous. He was always getting into trouble. And he got kind of pegged as a bad boy and struggled a lot. And so I kind of wanted to write Jack as kind of the bad boy, the kid who's always like getting into trouble. But I wanted to kind of understand why, he's doing all these things. I wanted to give him, this is really important in storytelling. We need our characters to have motivations for their actions. They need to have desires. And those desires need to be understood by what's happening in their lives. So there were some versions of Jack and the Beanstalk that I found in which the giant actually steals from Jack first, from his family first. And so when he goes up the beanstalk, he learns that everything that the giant has actually belongs to him first. So there was more justification for him taking the things, and that felt a little bit better to me morally. So, so I did create this connection between the giant worlds and Jack's world, and what was happening in the giant world that would cause them to steal from Jack's world. And there ended up being some really kind of fun connections between Jack's story and Rumpelstiltskin's story. Some of the characters in Rump return in Jack, and I ended up, connecting those worlds in a way that felt very unexpected and exciting. So character motivation, understanding what your character wants and why is very important to your story, will help drive the story forward. Okay? Now in Red, I also kept it from Red Riding Hood's point of view. And for a while, I was really fixated on the wolf and Red's relationship with the wolf. And that was, that's usually where the story kind of goes. In most of the retellings we see, it's Red and the wolf and what's happening there. And I worked with that for a long time. In fact, I wrote an entire version of the tale that was very fixated on Red's relationship with the wolf, and my editor rejected it. So Red, I like to say, is kind of my story of failure. As a writer, we have to, we're going to fail. Anything that we're doing, that we're learning and growing at, there's going to be failure. And it's not a bad thing. It is part of the process. It's part of learning. I really appreciate my failures, even though they're hard. They make me hungry, and they make me want to be better and figure out, okay, I didn't nail it this time, but how can I really get it the next time? I went back to the drawing board with the story, and I tried to look at it slightly differently. I was like, what is it? What am I not seeing here? What am I missing? And I realized, I went to the very beginning of the story. Before Red even meets the wolf, what is her goal? Where is she going? Anybody? She's going to Granny's house, because Granny, in some versions of the story, Granny is ill, and so her mother has asked her to bring her a basket of food to take to Granny. And that made me think of my own grandmother. This is my grandmother, and if she were here, she would say, look at me. Wasn't I gorgeous? And she was very beautiful. And she was a singer, and she cared for me a lot when I was younger. I had a very good relationship with her. I ended up writing her life story for her in her final years of life. And she knew I was writing this Red Riding Hood story, and she knew I was kind of basing the character of Granny after her, and she really, really wanted to read it. And that was when I was still kind of fixated on the wolf, and I was failing, and it wasn't working out. Well, then my grandmother passed away, and it made me really think, kind of this shift in my brain, and I was like, oh, this story isn't about Red and the wolf, it's about Red and her granny. And that's when I really changed the story, and Red realizes her granny is very ill, she's afraid that she's dying, and she really does not want her to die. And so she goes off into the woods to find a magic that can keep Granny from dying. And that is when the story just clicked into place. I sent it to my editor, even just the first couple of chapters and just an outline, and she was like, yes, you figured it out. So sometimes we have to fail. We have to make a lot of mistakes before we find the right path, that clicking point. And Red was definitely that case for me. Okay, my final fairy tale, Grump, the Fairly True Tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You actually meet this character in Red. So all my fairy tales kind of have this thread, this connective thread. You can read any of them on their own. They stand on their own, but it's really fun to read them all together because you see the connections that they have all together. And in Red, there's this grumpy little dwarf who Red happens to snatch by the beard, and the rule is if you catch a dwarf by the beard, they have to do whatever you tell them to do. And so she catches this dwarf by the beard. He is very upset by this. It's definitely a violation. But he is, she commands him to lead her to a certain place, and through the course of their conversation, Snow White comes up, because you know Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And this grumpy little dwarf calls Snow White a spoiled brat. And it just kind of came out. I was like, oh, why would he call Snow White a spoiled brat? What would this story look like from a dwarf's perspective? Honestly, they are really the most interesting characters in the story. We get fixated on the prince, and the evil queen, and Snow White, and True Love's Kiss, and all that, blah, blah, blah. But the dwarves, you know, they're the ones that take Snow White in, they protect her, and they're the ones that put her in that glass casket. They're mining in the mountain for crystals and gems. And this made me think of, I grew up in the mountains. I grew up in the Salt Lake Valley of Utah. And so this is me with my mom and my older sister. We are hiking to a place called Timpanogos Cave. It's a really cool cave. I'll show you some pictures. So really awesome caves with these cool giant stalactites and stalagmites. This is a huge, huge stalagmite, right? The top ones are top ones are T, stalactite.
Yeah.
Okay. It's huge. They call it the heart. They call it the heart of Timpanogos. And then all these like really cool curly stalactites. So really amazing cave system. And this was the inspiration for the caverns that the dwarves live in. They live underground. They never come to the surface because humans are too dangerous because they can catch them by the beard and then they have to do whatever they say. So they don't like humans. They stay underground in these caverns and they mine for crystals and gems, not to sell, not to wear, but to eat. It's their food. And all the crystals and gems have different powers and different flavors. And so it was really fun to create this this world. But this particular dwarf, he is very interested in the surface. It's kind of a Little Mermaid feel. He really, really is interested in the surface. He wants to know what's up there, what goes on, what are these things called trees and flowers, and he's interested in the humans too. But when he does go up, of course, someone catches him by the beard, and her name is Snow White, and he is compelled to do whatever she says. And then maybe an evil queen comes into the mix too, and also maybe catches him by the beard. Okay, so that's a little bit, those are all about my fairy tales, which are very imaginative and definitely personal. I was drawing a lot on my personal, my life and things. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I missed something. Okay, so Snow White had seven dwarfs. And cool connection, I have 7 siblings. I mentioned that I have, my editor loves to use this in her marketing campaign for my books, but I mentioned that my parents were divorced and remarried, so I had, there were 4 of us from my mom and dad, and then my stepdad had 3 kids and they had 1 together, so there were 8 of us all together, and we had this big, giant, 12-passenger van with a license plate that said 8th grade. And guess what? I got to drive that van to high school. And it was the subject matter for my very first published story. So kids, if you have embarrassing things in your life, things that are just feel like torture, and you are very sad about it, that is great story material. Just saying. Okay. So talked a lot about like more personal things. I'm going to talk for a minute about Time Castaways, which is the first, well, this is the first book in my Time Castaways trilogy, which is a time travel adventure, family adventure series. And I drew more on real research and historical facts in this series. So because they're time traveling, they're traveling all over the world throughout history, and there were lots of really cool things that I learned. But in a similar way to my fairy tales, taking a story that already existed, I was also taking real historical events and asking questions about them and kind of figuring out, what do we know, what do we not know, how can I use what we not know to my advantage, the blank space in these stories. So the first book is called The Mona Lisa Key, and that's because these three kids, they're siblings, they live in present day New York City, and they have one very strict rule in their family, and that is that they can never board any train or bus or any kind of transit without a parent present. Even as they're getting a little bit older and a lot of their friends are starting to take the subway to school by themselves, their parents are like, no way, we have to be present. But one day they wake up, their parents are gone, they've apparently gone to work, and they tell them to walk to school, but they're late, and so they decide to break the rule and they get on a subway train. But instead of going to school, they end up in Paris, France, in the year 1911, which is very important for the Mona Lisa. Sorry, that's the Mona Lisa. There's the Mona Lisa. Because the Mona Lisa was actually stolen from the Louvre Museum in Paris in August of 1911. And they land on the very day that the Mona Lisa is being stolen by this guy, Vincenzo Peruggia. Vincenzo Peruggia actually stole the Mona Lisa he just walked there. With security was not really a big deal back then. And so he walked into the museum with a white worker's coat on, kind of blending in with other workers. It was early in the morning. Goes to the place where the Mona Lisa is, pops it off the wall, pops it out of its frame, puts it under his coat, gets on a bus and gets out of there. Has it for 2 years. When he finally tries to sell it to a museum in Italy, because he thought that because the Mona Lisa was painted by an Italian painter, Leonardo da Vinci, he believed that it belonged to Italy. But in the process of trying to sell it to Italy, he was caught, he was arrested, he was put on trial. He ended up being kind of like an Italian hero. But the painting was restored to the Louvre. It was technically, owned by France, and so it hangs in the Louvre to this day. But I thought that was such an interesting thing. What happened with this painting for the 2 years he had it. There were lots of conspiracy theories that Vincenzo had not been working alone, that someone had been an accomplice with him. There is actually really no evidence to support that theory. But I thought, what if there were other people involved in this situation? And so these kids, they end up on this time traveling ship with all these self-proclaimed time pirates who travel through time, and they steal art and jewels from different times, and it's hard to catch them because they can time travel. And they decide they're going to steal the Mona Lisa, but they're using Vincenzo Peruggia kind of as the cover. And so they steal the Mona Lisa, and they have that, but there's a reason why they take the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa also has a lot of mystery around her too. There's always these conspiracy theories that there are secret codes embedded in the painting. And so the captain of the ship is using that painting to sort of get what he wants. He has his own mission that he's trying to accomplish, and these kids get involved in this mission and start to learn more about their family and their past and their future and what this all means for them. So using a lot of history and even a little bit of science and kind of blending this all into this kind of steampunk time travel adventure was a lot of fun, a ton of work, I did so much research. I never thought I would enjoy research. I always thought, no, I just want to be creative and come up with my own ideas. But oh man, it could be so fun to research these historical events and things that really happened and then think how you can blend them into your own story. It's really fun and a lot of work. And time travel is very mind bendy. And I would always say, if you're going to do time travel, proceed with caution. It's a lot of work. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit, now that I've told you a little bit about all of my ideas and where they come from, I want to share something about revision. And this is how I think about my first drafts. They're like a lump of coal. They're kind of rough, they're kind of ugly, all they're really good for is burning in the fire. They're just not that good. But this is when the revision process comes in handy, this is the process of what I think of taking our lump of coal and turning it into a shiny diamond. Okay, we are digging through all the kind of, dirt for that diamond. We are cutting off the rough edges, shaping it, polishing it. This is revision to me. So I'm going to show you guys some of my dirty work. I revise a lot. I told you guys with Red, I completely rewrote the story. I do a lot of rewriting. This is actually a page from Jack, which I had to maybe not fully rewrite quite like the way that I did Red, but it's almost like I would say only 10% of my first draft ends up in the final draft, maybe. I just changed so much. I do a lot of reordering. Sometimes I have all the pieces to the puzzle, but they don't fit together quite right, and I need to change the order. Some scenes need to come sooner, some scenes need to come later. I do a lot of rewording. I don't always find the best, most evocative language the first time around. So you can see me like crossing out words, writing new words in. I add detail. You can see me adding detail in the margins there. I cut detail. Sometimes when I print out my manuscripts, I have entire pages where I just have this big swoop through it, just like cut. And sometimes entire chapters go. Everything I'm looking at, how is this serving the story? How is this developing my characters and moving their goals forward? Is this pulling the reader along? I kind of like to look at my stories as lining up dominoes. And it can be very complicated. You line up those dominoes and you can put them in neat little swirls and everything. But you have to make sure you line them up in such a way that when you tip over the first one, everything follows after it. If one of them is out of alignment or if they're too far apart, it stops. And I like to look at story that way too. Every sentence, every scene and chapter has to tip the next domino over. If it stops, something's out of alignment, okay? Or something's too far apart. I can't always see for myself if something's out of alignment or if something's too far apart. And this is where I rely really heavily on feedback, okay? So this is actually a page from my first book, Rump, and my editor is marking it all up, okay? And they're basically, when I give my work to someone, I basically want them to tell me three things. What's working? If you're pulled along and you're interested, and I want to know what's working for you. What's boring? Okay, I really don't want my reader to be bored, so I want to know where you're kind of feeling like, I'm willing to put the book down right now, or not interested anymore. I could stop and not really care. That is a huge red flag. What's confusing? Okay, it's a little confusion is okay. It's like, I'm not really sure what's going on, but I want to know. I'm willing to keep reading to find out. But if they're so confused that they're like, I just don't get it, I'm not following what's happening at all, then that's a red flag and I need to clarify. So my editor does that. She goes through up at the top. She said, could you say exactly what the idea is? Which meant she was confused and I needed to clarify what was going on in that moment. Towards the bottom, she circled a paragraph and she said, I might mention this later. It's slowing the momentum here, which was a really nice professional way of saying, I'm bored, you know. And then it's my job as the writer to take that feedback and find the solution, okay? Sometimes people give me potential solutions. I try not to pay too much attention. They can work, but really what I'm looking for is what is the problem? What is the problem? And then I, as the author, need to come up with a solution that I feel really works for me and for my story, okay? And after we've done that like 100 times, we're finally ready to turn it into a book. See, there are all the covers. Aren't they so pretty? We're finally ready to turn it into a book. And this is the part that is actually one of the hardest parts of the process. It's the process of letting go. It feels a little bit like sending your child off to college. I just did that for the first time last fall. I sent my oldest baby off to college. And it is this process of like, oh my gosh, did I do enough? Is it okay? Are you gonna survive? And she's doing great, by the way. And so that's what it's like, kind of letting go of a story. I no longer have control over it. I've done everything I can for this story. It's not even mine anymore. It's now yours, the readers, and you get to decide whether you read it or not and whether you like it or not. So that's it. And with that, I would love to turn the time over to you if you guys have any questions for me about my books or writing.
Can you ask too if anyone has one?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I know, hello people, lovely people joining us online. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and Jody will be happy to pass those along to me. But any questions here? No? I told you everything. Any questions from online?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, if they come up, feel free, but should we move on to the winner announcement?
We certainly can.
Okay.
Let's turn this off so we aren't.
Okay, sounds good.
Just give me 1
Yeah.
second. That way we don't have it blinding in our faces.
Alrighty.
I won't be able to hear me, so.
Oh,
you can say them.
Okay, that's so, well, these will announce everything, but we're gonna start, we'll go fourth grade.
okay.
And
In third place for the fourth grade division, we have Alaya Lopez. Do you want to tell us the title of your story? The Missing Crown Guard. I got you. Okay. In second place for the fourth grade division, we have Inaya Ahmed. The Book Fairy. In first place from the fourth grade division is Henry Holman. Congratulations. What's the title of your story? What was that? Bill's Story. Well done. All right, moving on to fifth grade. In third place, we have Arav Sharma. What was the title of your story? The World in the Tiny Place. The World in the Tiny Place. That was a mind bender. That's very good. Okay, second place in the fifth grade division is Nala Winter Panozo. a repeat winner.
Uh-huh.
She's on a roll. Congratulations. And what was the title of your story? CF Stingray. Okay, that's good. That was first place in the 5th grade division is Maya the Tiller. Too many. There were too many
Great.
unicorns. Okay, moving on to 6th grade. 3rd place is Luisa Savazzini. Congratulations. What was the title of your story? The Ocean My Joy. The Ocean My Joy. That was beautiful. All right, 2nd place in the 6th grade division is Lily Brandon. Congratulations. And what was the title of your story? The Immigrant. Very good. Okay, 1st place in the 6th grade division goes to Noelle Dinker.
So 6th grade. Right, in the meantime, well, thank you. I mean, congratulations to everybody. Like I said, all the stories were amazing because, I've read all the stories. She's read the stories. It was a tough choice to get to the top. I really appreciate it. So I'm super excited. Everyone submitted stories. Please keep writing for the 4th and 5th graders. I really hope to see stories next year. 6th graders, there is a handwriting contest. Just look in the newsletter. It's brand new this year, first time. Called Scripted. So we've got something coming up for you guys, additional to write. And then in the meantime, did anybody think of any questions before we wrap this up? Did you have a question there? No?
Oh, how many submissions were there?
45.
45.
45, and I don't remember the breakout per grade, but it was pretty even amongst the grades. Probably 45 altogether this year. Any other questions? And let me check the chat online.
And then I think the winners of the contest get to stay.
Yeah, we do have a question for you, Liesl.
Okay.
Sean would like to know, what's your suggestion for kids if they'd like to get books published?
My suggestion is to be patient. So I'm not saying that kids can't write amazing work because clearly you do. I think that you should continue to hone your craft and to read a lot. And if you feel like you have created something that you really want to publish and share as widely as possible, start looking at other writers who are writing in your similar genre. And how are they getting published? Where are they publishing? So I did that a lot. Like when I was writing certain stories, I would look for other writers that were kind of writing in a similar style and genre that I was writing. What was their journey toward publication? Because there are lots of options out there. It can feel very wild and confusing. So I think that you have to kind of ask yourself, what is your goal for publication? Who are you wanting to share with? And who is doing what you would like to do already? So find some mentors, some people who are doing things that are doing what you want to do, and figure out what was their path to publication. I think that's kind of the best advice I can give, short of saying exactly how I did it, but what I've done may not be exactly what you're trying to do. So look to the people that are doing what you want to do and find out, what their journey was, who they're publishing with, that sort of thing. That helps.
Any other questions? Anything else? Good, yes.
How old were you when you published your first book?
I was, let's see, it's going to be 10 years. I was 30. Yeah, it's when I published Rump. So pretty young actually. Like I know a lot of authors, and it's never too early and it's never too late. So I know some authors that published their first books when they were teenagers. I know some authors that didn't publish their first book until they were in their 60s. And so it's kind of just like whenever it's right for you. And I published 7 books, like kind of pretty successively, year after year. And now the pandemic hit and I took a break and I haven't published anything in 3 years. So I think that there's no timeline and there's no age. You're welcome.
I encourage everyone to keep writing. Just as an FYI, we do have a published author from a previous short story contest winner. So
Oh, really?
yes,
That's
yeah,
so
I think
cool.
she had just graduated college at this point, but she was like first place when she was 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and in high
Oh,
school
so
she got a
cool.
book published.
But
So it's possible.
it is, and
It's
all of you,
possible.
all the stories I read, I was like, there's some serious writing chops here. Like, there's some really good stuff happening, great ideas, and some good skill too. So, very well done.
Well, thank you. Now, and then do some housekeeping before we get on here.
All right.